The day I opened my mailbox and found a $2,000 fine from the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association was the day I realized I had seriously underestimated how petty human beings could be. I stood there in the freezing February wind outside my townhouse in Boulder, Colorado, staring at the letter like it might suddenly transform into something that made sense. The paper trembled in my hands, though whether from the cold or my rising anger, I could not tell. According to the notice signed by Patricia Cunningham, HOA president, my backup heating system violated Section 14.7 of the Community Guidelines regarding unauthorized exterior modifications and equipment installations. The backup heating system in question was a small propane-powered unit I had installed last autumn after the main heating system failed during an early cold snap. It sat tucked behind my townhouse, barely visible from the street, connected to my water pipes to prevent them from freezing during power outages. Boulder winters were no joke, and the previous year had seen multiple extended blackouts during ice storms. I walked back inside, the letter crumpling in my grip. My golden retriever, Max, looked up from his bed near the fireplace, sensing my mood. I pulled out my phone and dialed the HOA office number listed on the letterhead. Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, Patricia speaking. The voice was bright and chipper in a way that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Hi, this is Yuri Baxter from 247 Willow Creek Drive. I just received a fine for my backup heating system, and I think there has been a mistake." "No mistake, Mr. Baxter." The cheerfulness evaporated from her voice. "Your propane heater violates our community standards. It is unsightly and potentially dangerous. It is behind my house. You cannot even see it from the street, and it is necessary to prevent my pipes from freezing during power outages." "That is not my concern, Mr. Baxter. The rules are very clear. All exterior modifications must be approved by the board before installation. You never submitted an application." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level. I was not aware I needed approval for safety equipment. "Can I submit an application now and have the fine waived?" "The fine stands regardless. And even if you submit an application, I can tell you right now it will be denied. We do not allow propane equipment on the premises. It is a liability issue." "So what am I supposed to do when the power goes out and the temperature drops below zero? Just let my pipes freeze and burst?" "That is not HOA business, Mr. Baxter. You will need to find another solution. The fine is due within 30 days, and if the equipment is not removed within 2 weeks, we will begin daily fines of $100 until it is gone." The line went dead before I could respond. I spent the next 3 days researching the HOA bylaws, reading through the dense legal language that governed every aspect of life in Meadowbrook Estates. Patricia was technically correct. Section 14.7 did require pre-approval for exterior modifications, though the definition of what constituted a modification was vague enough to drive a truck through. The section about propane equipment was buried in an amendment from 2019 that I had never received, probably because I had only moved in 2 years ago. On Thursday evening, I attended the monthly HOA board meeting at the community center, a squat brick building that smelled of old coffee and disappointment. About 15 other homeowners were scattered throughout the folding chairs, most of them looking as thrilled to be there as I felt. Patricia Cunningham sat at the front table with 4 other board members. She was exactly what I had pictured from her voice. Mid-50s, blonde hair styled into an aggressive bob, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She had the expression of someone who had found her calling in life and that calling was making other people miserable. "Next on the agenda," Patricia said, consulting her tablet, "we have Mr. Baxter here to discuss his violation notice. Mr. Baxter, you have 3 minutes." I stood up, my notes trembling slightly in my hands. "Thank you. I am here to request that the board reconsider the fine and allow me to keep my backup heating system. Last winter, we had 3 separate power outages that lasted more than 12 hours each. During one of those outages, my main heating system failed. Without the backup system, my pipes would have frozen, causing thousands of dollars in damage not just to my property but potentially to neighboring units as well." Patricia did not even pretend to look sympathetic. "Mr. Baxter, the rules exist for everyone. If we make an exception for you, where does it end? Next week, someone else wants a generator, then someone wants a shed, then our community looks like a junkyard. This is not decorative. It is necessary safety equipment." "Your time is almost up, Mr. Baxter. The board has already voted on this matter. The decision is final. You have 2 weeks to remove the equipment or face daily fines. You voted on this without even notifying me, without giving me a chance to present my case. We are notifying you now." 1 minute remaining. A man in the second row, someone I recognized as living a few streets over, raised his hand. "I have to say, this seems pretty harsh. The guy is just trying to keep his pipes from freezing." Patricia turned her gaze on him like a laser. "Mr. Henderson, you are not recognized to speak, and may I remind you that your own property has several violations pending for your fence paint color." Mr. Henderson sank back in his seat. I tried a different approach. "What if I relocate it somewhere less visible? Or build an enclosure around it? No propane equipment, period. That is the rule. Time is up, Mr. Baxter. Please sit down so we can move on to other business." I sat, my face burning with humiliation and anger. The rest of the meeting droned on about landscaping requirements and an upcoming community garage sale that no one seemed interested in. I left as soon as it was over, not trusting myself to speak to Patricia without saying something I would regret. Over the weekend, I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Martin Chen, and his office was in downtown Boulder with a view of the Flatirons. He listened to my story, reviewed the documents I brought, and gave me the news I did not want to hear. "Legally, they are probably within their rights," Martin said, leaning back in his chair. "The bylaws give them broad authority over exterior modifications, and that 2019 amendment about propane is pretty clear. You could fight it, but it would cost you more in legal fees than the fine is worth, and you would probably lose anyway. So I just have to take it. You have to remove the equipment and pay the fine, yes, unless—" He paused, tapping his pen against his desk. "Unless the removal causes damages that you can prove resulted from their unreasonable enforcement of the rules. But that would be after the fact, and it would still be a tough case." I left his office feeling defeated. $2,000 was not going to bankrupt me, but it was not nothing either. And the principle of the thing burned in my chest like acid reflux. On Monday morning, I called a licensed contractor to come disconnect the backup heating system. His name was Dave, a weathered man in his 60s who had been doing HVAC work in Colorado for 40 years. He looked at the propane unit with professional appreciation. "This is a nice setup," he said. "Smart thinking with the winters we have been having. Shame to take it out." "HOA says it has to go," Dave snorted. "HOA. I have seen more damage caused by HOA rules than by actual problems. Had a guy last year who was not allowed to reinforce his deck railing because it did not match the approved style. Railing collapsed during a party. 3 people in the hospital. Did he sue? Settled out of court. HOA has good insurance. Dave spent 2 hours carefully disconnecting the system, capping off the lines and hauling the unit away in his truck. When he was done, my water pipes were protected only by the main heating system, which had already failed me once. I stood in my backyard, looking at the empty space where the backup heater had been, feeling like I had just removed a smoke detector to stop it from beeping. I wrote a check for $2,000 and mailed it to the HOA office with a letter formally protesting the fine for the record. I did not expect anything to come of it, but my lawyer had suggested documenting everything. February gave way to March, and the weather turned deceptively mild. The snow melted, the sun came out, and Boulder briefly remembered that spring was supposed to exist. I almost forgot about the heating system, distracted by work and life and Max needing expensive dental surgery for a cracked tooth. Then March 23rd arrived with the kind of weather whiplash that only Colorado can deliver. The temperature dropped 30 degrees overnight. By evening, snow was falling in thick, wet clumps that clung to power lines and tree branches with ominous weight. I checked the weather forecast and felt my stomach drop. The storm was expected to last 3 days, with temperatures plunging to 10 below zero. At 9 o'clock that night, my lights flickered twice and died. The house went silent except for the wind howling outside. Max whined nervously. "It is okay, boy," I said, more to reassure myself than him. I found my flashlight and checked my phone. According to the power company's website, a transformer had blown, and restoration time was estimated at 12 to 18 hours. But I had been through this before. In weather like this, it could take much longer. I put on every layer I owned and huddled under blankets on the couch with Max pressed against me for warmth. The house cooled rapidly without the heating system running. Within 3 hours, I could see my breath inside. I kept thinking about the backup heater sitting in Dave's storage unit somewhere, perfectly capable of keeping my pipes from freezing, removed because Patricia Cunningham thought it was unsightly. By morning, the temperature inside the house had dropped to 38 degrees. I was shivering despite the blankets, my fingers numb and clumsy. I checked my phone. Still no power, and the estimated restoration time had been pushed back to 24 hours. Outside, the storm continued to rage, adding another 6 inches to the foot of snow already on the ground. I knew my pipes were in danger. The ones running along the exterior walls were especially vulnerable. I tried every trick I could think of, opening cabinet doors to let what little warmth remained reach the pipes, letting faucets drip to keep water moving, even wrapping exposed pipes in towels. But without heat, I was fighting a losing battle. At 2 in the afternoon, I heard it. A sharp crack from the bathroom, followed by a sound like someone had turned on a faucet. My heart sank. I ran to the bathroom and found water spraying from the pipe behind the toilet, a steady stream that was already pooling on the tile floor. I shut off the main water valve, but the damage was done. Water had soaked through the bathroom floor, seeped into the walls, and was starting to drip into the ceiling of the unit below mine. My downstairs neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, was knocking on my door before I even had time to process what had happened. "Water is coming through my ceiling," she called through the door. "What is happening?" I opened the door, apologizing profusely. Mrs. Chen took one look at my blue-tinged lips and shivering frame and insisted I come down to her unit, which was mercifully warmer because she had a gas fireplace. I grabbed Max and what little food I had and followed her downstairs. Her living room ceiling was dripping steadily into a collection of pots and pans. The damage was extensive and getting worse by the minute. I called my insurance company and filed a claim, then called a 24-hour emergency plumber. He said he would try to get there, but that he had 40 other calls ahead of mine, all from frozen pipes. It might be tomorrow before he could make it. The power finally came back on 36 hours after it went out. By then, the damage to my townhouse and Mrs. Chen's was extensive. The bathroom floor was destroyed, the drywall in 3 rooms needed to be replaced, and Mrs. Chen's ceiling required complete reconstruction. My insurance adjuster, a tired-looking woman named Sarah who said this was her 15th frozen pipe claim that week, estimated the total damages at $45,000. "Good thing you have insurance," she said, taking photos of the damage. This is exactly the kind of thing policies are meant to cover, though I have to ask, did you have any backup heating? I did, I said. The HOA made me remove it 2 weeks before this storm. Sarah looked up from her camera. Seriously? They fined me $2,000 and threatened daily fines until I took it out. She whistled low. You should talk to a lawyer about that. This might be a case of negligent enforcement of rules leading to foreseeable damages. I called Martin Chen the next day. This time, he sounded much more interested. They made you remove equipment designed to prevent exactly this kind of damage, and then this happened during a reasonably foreseeable weather event. That is potentially a very strong case. The HOA could be liable for negligence. What would I need to prove? That their enforcement of the rule was unreasonable under the circumstances, that they knew or should have known it would lead to this kind of damage, and that you suffered actual losses as a result. You have all 3. The timing is particularly damning. Less than a month between forced removal and the pipes freezing. That establishes clear causation. We spent the next week building a case. Martin sent a formal demand letter to the HOA, requesting they cover my insurance deductible, Mrs. Chen's damages that my insurance would not cover, and compensation for the property damage their rule enforcement had directly caused. He asked for $100,000, figuring we would settle for less. Patricia's response came within 3 days. It was 2 pages of legal boilerplate that essentially said, "Not our problem. You assumed the risk by buying in an HOA community. We have immunity for good faith enforcement of properly enacted rules." She is not taking you seriously, Martin said when he called to read me the letter. She thinks you will just go away. What do? We file suit. And we go after them hard. Discovery is going to be very interesting. I want to see all their internal communications about your case, all board meeting minutes, everything. We filed the lawsuit in Boulder County District Court in April. The case was Yuri Baxter v. Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, Inc., and Patricia Cunningham individually. Martin added Patricia personally because he suspected she had been the driving force behind the unreasonable enforcement. The lawsuit got people's attention. Within a week, 2 other homeowners from Meadowbrook Estates contacted Martin with their own stories of Patricia's enforcement overreach. One had been fined for having the wrong shade of white trim paint. Another had been threatened with foreclosure over unpaid fines for parking his work truck, which had a small company logo, in his own driveway. Patricia apparently treated the rulebook like scripture and herself as its prophet. In May, we entered discovery. Martin subpoenaed all HOA records related to my case and to propane equipment generally. What came back was enlightening. The 2019 propane amendment had been passed in a special board meeting with only 3 of 5 board members present. The stated reason in the minutes was safety concerns about propane storage, but there was no documentation of any actual safety incidents or even research into whether such concerns were valid. More damningly, one board member had objected to the amendment, noting that it could lead to exactly the kind of frozen pipe problems that had occurred during power outages. His objection had been overruled by Patricia. Even better, Martin found emails between Patricia and the HOA's insurance company from just before my fine was issued. The insurance company had specifically advised against blanket bans on backup heating equipment, noting that such bans could increase liability if they led to preventable property damage. Patricia had ignored this advice. "This is gold," Martin said, showing me the emails in his office. She knew this was a bad idea. She was specifically warned it could lead to liability, and she did it anyway. Why would she do that? Because she could. Because she likes having power. Take your pick. In June, the HOA's lawyers requested a settlement conference. We met in a conference room in downtown Boulder, one of those sterile spaces with a long table and windows that did not open. Patricia was there with two lawyers, both looking expensive and uncomfortable. I was there with Martin and a folder full of damage estimates, repair bills, and photos of my destroyed bathroom. The HOA's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Robert Stevens, opened with an offer of $10,000 to make the case go away. Martin laughed. "My client's damages exceed $50,000. Your client's negligent enforcement directly caused those damages. We have documented warnings that this exact scenario could occur. We have board meeting minutes showing objections that were overruled. And we have your client sitting right there, who I am very much looking forward to deposing about why she ignored her own insurance company's advice." Patricia leaned forward. "This is absurd. We enforce the rules. That is our job. If we did not, the whole community would fall apart." "You enforced a rule that your own insurance company warned you not to enforce," Martin said. "You removed safety equipment right before a major storm. My client begged you for an exception because he knew this could happen. You fined him instead. He violated the rules. And your job is to enforce rules reasonably. A blanket ban on backup heating equipment in Colorado is not reasonable. It is negligent." The settlement conference ended without agreement. Patricia stormed out, her lawyers trailing behind her looking resigned. We continued toward trial. Martin lined up expert witnesses. A contractor who would testify about the necessity of backup heating in Colorado winters. An insurance expert who would explain how Patricia's decision increased, rather than decreased liability. And a property management specialist who would testify that reasonable HOAs do not enforce rules that create foreseeable dangers. In August, the case took an unexpected turn. One of the other homeowners who had contacted Martin, a man named Jeff Morrison, filed his own lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and selective enforcement. His case centered on Patricia targeting him for minor violations, while ignoring identical violations by her friends in the community. He had documentation, photos of his truck being cited while 3 other identical trucks went uninspected, emails showing Patricia's friendly relationship with violators she never fined. The local news picked up on the dual lawsuits. A reporter from the Boulder Daily Camera wrote a story about HOA overreach using our cases as examples. The story quoted several homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates who were afraid to speak on the record, but who described a climate of fear around Patricia's enforcement. Patricia did not like the attention. She gave an interview calling the lawsuits frivolous and saying she was just trying to maintain property values. The interview backfired. She came across as exactly what she was, a petty tyrant who enjoyed wielding power over her neighbors. In September, 2 board members resigned. One of them, the same man who had objected to the propane ban in 2019, wrote a public letter explaining that he could not in good conscience continue serving on a board that valued rigid rule enforcement over common sense and community well-being. The letter mentioned my case specifically, saying that my backup heater should have been approved and that its removal had been, predictably, and unnecessarily dangerous. With only 3 board members left, the HOA was required by its bylaws to hold a special election. Several homeowners threw their names in, running on platforms of reforming Patricia's policies. The campaign was contentious. Patricia sent out multiple emails defending her tenure, claiming that any relaxation of standards would lead to chaos and plummeting property values. The election in October was a landslide against her. All 3 new board members were reform candidates. Patricia lost her position as president and submitted her resignation from the board entirely the next day, citing lack of appreciation for her years of service. The new board immediately reached out to Martin about settling. We met again in November, this time in a much friendlier atmosphere. The new board president was a software engineer named Lisa Martinez, who had moved to Meadowbrook Estates 2 years before me. She opened the meeting with an apology. "What happened to you should not have happened," she said. "The board has reviewed your case thoroughly, and we believe Patricia's enforcement was unreasonable and negligent. We want to make this right." The settlement was for $75,000, covering all my damages, my legal fees, compensation for my time and stress, and money specifically designated to reimburse Mrs. Chen for losses my insurance had not covered. The settlement also included a policy change. The propane equipment ban was repealed, and a new provision was added allowing backup heating systems with reasonable safety standards and basic aesthetic requirements. I signed the settlement agreement in Martin's office on a cold November afternoon. Max was with me, his tail wagging as he sensed my good mood. "Congratulations," Martin said, shaking my hand. "This is one of the better outcomes I have seen in an HOA case. Usually they just bury people in legal fees until they give up. What made the difference?" "You had clear documentation, obvious causation, and you were willing to fight. Also, Patricia overplayed her hand. If she had just settled quietly in the beginning, this would have cost them a lot less money and a lot less embarrassment." With the settlement money, I paid off the repair bills with plenty left over. I had Dave reinstall my backup heating system, this time with a decorative enclosure that satisfied the new board's aesthetic requirements. I also installed a second backup system, a small generator that could power essential systems during outages. Mrs. Chen was grateful for the money that covered her losses. She baked me cookies and told me she had never liked Patricia anyway. The story got back to me through neighbors that Patricia had moved out of Meadowbrook Estates entirely, buying a condo in a different part of Boulder where, hopefully, she had less power over other people's lives. Jeff Morrison's case settled too, for a smaller amount but with an agreement that his record of violations would be expunged. The new board turned out to be everything the old one was not. They held open meetings where homeowners could actually voice concerns. They enforced rules reasonably, with an eye toward community well-being rather than rigid compliance. They even started a community emergency preparedness program, distributing information about winterizing homes and protecting pipes during cold snaps. On December 15th, another major winter storm rolled through Boulder. The power went out again, this time for almost 2 days. My backup heating system kept my pipes safe and my house tolerably warm. I checked on Mrs. Chen, who was also fine, and on several other neighbors who were not as prepared. I let 2 of them use my guest room until the power came back, grateful that I had the ability to help. When spring came, I planted a garden in the small patch of earth behind my townhouse. It was technically against the old landscape rules, which required all common areas to be maintained exclusively by HOA contracted services. But the new board had relaxed those rules too, reasoning that homeowners who wanted to beautify their own spaces should be encouraged, not punished. Max loved the garden. He would lay in the sun while I pulled weeds, his tail wagging contentedly. On one of those spring afternoons, Lisa Martinez stopped by while walking her own dog. She looked at the garden approvingly. "This is what a community should look like," she said. "People making improvements, taking ownership, working together. Not everyone terrified of getting fined for living their lives." "I appreciate what you and the board have done," I said. "You made this place feel like home again." She smiled. "We are just trying to undo the damage and move forward." Though I will say, your case was a wake-up call. A lot of homeowners did not realize how out of control things had gotten until you fought back. Fighting back. That was one way to describe it. At the time, it had felt less like fighting and more like surviving, desperately trying to prove that I was not crazy for thinking Patricia's enforcement was wrong. But maybe Lisa was right. Maybe standing up to unreasonable authority, even when it felt hopeless, was the only way to make things better. That summer, the Meadowbrook Estates community held its first annual block party. It was the new board's idea, an attempt to rebuild neighborly connections that had frayed under Patricia's regime of fines and fear. Someone set up a grill. Someone else brought a sound system. Kids ran around with water balloons while adults stood in clusters, talking and laughing. I stood there with a beer in my hand, watching the community come alive, and thought about the chain of events that had led here. A frozen pipe, a lawsuit, an election. It seemed almost absurd that something as mundane as a backup heater could spark so much conflict and eventual change. But then, maybe that was the point. The small injustices were the ones that piled up, the ones that people lived with because fighting seemed too hard or too expensive or too uncertain. Patricia had counted on that. She had counted on people accepting her fines and her rules and her vision of how the community should be, because the alternative was too daunting. She had been wrong about me, and she had been wrong about the community. Sometimes people did fight back. Sometimes they won. Jeff Morrison walked over holding a plate of burgers. "Hey, you are the guy who took down Patricia, right?" "I had a lot of help," I said. "Still, that was something. I never would have filed my own case if you had not gone first." He raised his beer in a toast, to fighting the good fight. I clinked my bottle against his. "To reasonable HOA boards." "Better yet," he laughed, "to HOA boards that remember they work for us, not the other way around." The party went on until dark. Max made friends with every dog and child there, living his best life. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I felt something I had not felt since moving to Meadowbrook Estates. Like I actually belonged to a community. The next few years were quiet, at least by comparison. The new board continued their reforms, always looking for ways to balance community standards with individual freedoms. Property values did not plummet as Patricia had predicted. If anything, they rose slightly, as word got out that Meadowbrook Estates was under new, saner management. I kept in touch with Martin Chen, who occasionally sent me articles about other HOA disputes he was handling. Some were similar to mine. Homeowners being punished for reasonable modifications or improvements. Others were even more egregious. HOAs foreclosing on homes over a few $100s in fines, boards embezzling community funds, personal vendettas played out through selective enforcement. Each article reminded me how fortunate I had been. I had the resources to hire a lawyer. I had clear documentation of the HOA's negligence. I had damages that were severe enough to make a lawsuit worthwhile, but not so severe that they ruined my life. Not everyone in HOA disputes was so lucky. In the 4th year after my lawsuit, I was asked to join the HOA board myself. The request came from Lisa Martinez, who was stepping down as president to focus on a new job that required frequent travel. She thought I would be good at it, given my experience and my investment in keeping the community reasonable. I almost said no. The last thing I wanted was to spend my evenings in meetings arguing about landscaping standards and parking rules. But then I thought about Patricia and about how communities became nightmares when good people did not get involved. I accepted. Serving on the board was more challenging than I expected, but also more rewarding. I learned that HOA governance was not inherently evil. Rules did serve a purpose. They prevented truly problematic behavior, maintained common areas, and provided a framework for conflict resolution. The problem was never the existence of rules. It was how they were enforced and by whom, and toward what end. Our board tried to enforce rules with empathy. When someone had a violation, we started with a friendly conversation rather than an immediate fine. When someone needed an exception, we asked why and tried to find solutions that worked for everyone. When someone could not pay their dues, we set up payment plans rather than threatening foreclosure. It was not always easy. Some homeowners took advantage of the relaxed enforcement, letting their properties deteriorate or ignoring requests to address legitimate problems. We had to find the balance between tyranny and chaos, between Patricia's iron fist and complete abdication of responsibility. But mostly, it worked. The community thrived. People stopped being afraid of their HOA. They started participating in meetings, volunteering for committees, and suggesting improvements. Meadowbrook Estates became the kind of place where neighbors actually knew and helped each other, where rules existed to support the community rather than constrain it. 5 years after the frozen pipe incident, on a cold February evening that reminded me of that terrible storm, I sat in the community center for a board meeting. We were discussing whether to approve a homeowner's request to install solar panels on their roof. The old architectural standards had prohibited them, calling them unsightly. "I think we should approve it," I said. "Solar panels are good for the environment and save money. The old standard was outdated." The other board members agreed. We voted unanimously to approve the solar panels and to update the architectural standards to explicitly allow renewable energy installations. After the meeting, I walked home through the quiet streets, past houses decorated for Valentine's Day, past snow-covered lawns and parked cars. I thought about the backup heater that still sat behind my townhouse, humming softly, keeping my pipes safe. I thought about Patricia wherever she was and hoped she had learned something from everything that happened. Though I doubted it, I thought about Mrs. Chen, now almost 90, who still baked me cookies every Christmas. I thought about Jeff Morrison, who had joined the landscaping committee and was leading an initiative to plant native Colorado species throughout the community. I thought about Lisa Martinez, who had started the reform movement and proven that change was possible. Mostly, I thought about the lesson I had learned through all of this, that standing up to petty tyrants was always worth it, even when it seemed hopeless. That communities were only as good as the people who participated in them. That rules without reason were just another form of oppression, and that anyone who told you otherwise was probably drunk on a tiny bit of power. When I got home, Max greeted me at the door with his usual enthusiasm, like I had been gone for years instead of 2 hours. I scratched behind his ears and looked around my townhouse, at the repaired walls and the warm air flowing from the vents and the small life I had built here. It was good to be home. It was good to live in a place where I did not have to fear my own homeowners association. It was good to know that sometimes, when you fought back against injustice, you actually won. The backup heater kicked on in the basement, responding to the dropping temperature outside. I smiled at the sound. That little unit had cost me $2,000 in fines, $50,000 in property damage, and months of legal stress. It had also taught me that my home was worth fighting for, that communities were worth saving, and that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance mattered the most. I poured myself a drink and settled onto the couch with Max. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. My pipes were safe. My home was warm. And somewhere out there, I like to think, Patricia was learning that being right about the rules did not matter if you were wrong about everything else.